as I read through the origin and insertion, I would recommend physically touching it on your own person. And when I go through the actions, I would also recommend acting it out. Our first muscle is the sternocleidomastoid. Its origin is the manubrium and the medial portion of the clavicle. The sternocleidomastoid insertion is the mastoid process of the temporal bone, and its action is the flexion and rotation to opposite side of head. Elevation of sternum assists in forced inhalation. Now to the scalenes. Scalene anterior. Its origin is the transverse process of cervical 3 through cervical 6 vertebrae. Its insertion is the scalene tubercle and the cranial crest of the first rib. Now the scalene medius, its origin is the posterior tubercles of T10 and cervical. Its origin is the transverse process of C2 through C7, and its insertion is the cranial surface of the first rib. The scalene posterior. Its origin is by the tendons from the tubercle of the transverse process cervical 4 through cervical 6. Its insertion is the outer surface of the second rib. And all of these scalenes do flexion and lateral flexion of the cervical spine. The splenius capitis, its origin is the lower part of the ligamentum nuchae, and the full spinous process of T1 through T4. Its splenius capitis insertion is the mastoid process and the outer part of the superior nuchal line, and its action is extension of head and neck. The splenius cervicus origin is the spinous process of thoracic 3 through thoracic 6 vertebrae. Its insertion is the transverse process of cervical 1 through cervical 3 vertebrae. And its function is it bilaterally extends the head and neck and laterally flexion same side and rotation of the same side. The mass eater. Origin, the lower border of the zygomatic arch. The insertion is the lateral surface of the mandible, and its action, it closes the jaw. The temporalis. Its origin is the temporal bone. Its insertion is the coracoid process and the lateral surface of the mandible, and its action is also closing of the jaw. Rectus abdominis. Origin, pubis, crest. Insertion, ribs 5 through 7 and the xiphoid process. And it does extension of the lumbar spine. The internal oblique. Origin is the inguinal ligaments, the iliac crest, and the lambodorsa fascia. Its insertion is the linea alba, the xiphoid process, and the inferior ribs. Its action is it rotates the torso on the same side. The external oblique. Origin, the lower 8 costals. The insertion is the iliac crest, the ligamentum inguinal, and its action is it rotates torso to the opposite side. The transverse abdominis. Its origin is the lateral 1/3 of the inguinal ligaments and the inner lip of the iliac crest. Its insertion and where the muscle ends is in a broad aponeurosis. Its action is it compresses the ribs. The iliacus. Origin, upper 2/3 of the iliac fossa. Insertion, lesser trochanter of the femur, and it flexes and rotates the thigh medially. The iliopsoas. Its origin is the anterior surface and the transverse process of the vertebrae lumbar 1 through lumbar 5. Its insertion is the lesser trochanter of the femur, and it rotates bilaterally. The tensor fascia lata. Its origin is the anterior superior iliac spine. Its insertion is the iliotibial band of the iliac femoral and the femoral tibial, and it abducts and stabilizes the iliofemoral and the femoral tibial joints. The gluteus maximus. Its origin is the posterior aspect of dorsal ilium, posterior superior iliac crest, and posterior inferior sacrum and coccyx. Its insertion is the iliotibial band and the gluteal tuberosity, which is posterior femoral surface. Its action is it extends the acetobulofemoral joints. The gluteus medius. The origin is the dorsal ilium inferior to iliac crest. Insertion is the lateral and superior surface of the greater trochanter of the femur, and the gluteus medius abducts the thigh. Gluteus minimus. Origin, external surface of ilium between anterior and inferior gluteal lines. The insertion is the greater trochanter of the femur, and what it does, it abducts the femur and medially rotates the femur and depression of the pelvis. The piriforms. Origin is the sacrum. Its insertion is the greater trochanter of the femur, and it rotates laterally the acetabulo-femoral, which is the thigh joints. The biceps femoris. Its origin is the ischial tuberosity and linea aspera. Its insertion is the head of the fibula, and it helps in knee flexion and hip extension. The vastus medius. Its origin is the intertrochanteric line. Its insertion is the quadriceps tendon, and it extends the knee. The vastus intermedius. Origin, anterior and lateral surface of the femoral shaft. Its insertion is the quadriceps tendon and the base of the patella, as well as the patellar ligaments, and it extends the knee. The knee is made out of two joints, the fibular-tibular femoral and the patellofemoral. And finally, the vastus lateralis. Origin, the greater trochanter of the femur. The insertion is the quadriceps tendon again, and what it does what it does, which is extends and stabilizes the knee.